So this morning I'll be talking about performance management and insights. Like Christian said, I'll be covering a few different aspects of our platform in this presentation. And Dale Dean, who's the Chief Strategic Performance Officer for the city of Southlake, Texas, he and I worked on this presentation together. Unfortunately, he's unable to be here today, so I'll still be incorporating some of his ideas and his story in the presentation, as well as sharing my thoughts on the subject. So I've worked at Esri for about 15 years, mostly supporting local governments, cities and counties, as Christian said, in the Mid-Atlantic region. And I've learned a lot from the cities and counties that I've worked most closely with. So, for example, seeing how the city of Baltimore and their CitySat program, how they do performance management versus how the city of Pittsburgh does it. There are a lot of differences. You know, every city, every county has their own unique challenges and their own unique circumstances. But one thing that I've seen is that everyone's typically driving to a similar outcome. They all have that same kind of end result in mind. So the details might be different, but the end goal is generally very similar. So what I'd like to do today is present the story of Southlake, but I think, as I just said, it's something that's applicable to everyone. So I'm sure everyone in the audience will get something out of today's presentation. So first I'll introduce Southlake. Dale would be proud to introduce his city if he were here. Southlake is a small but growing city in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. It's about 30,000 people. It's actually just northwest of the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. I'm from Philadelphia. Texas is a little bit of like foreign territory to me, so visiting Southlake was actually the first time that I had been to Texas. The people who live in Southlake are career professionals. They have high-paying white-collar jobs. They have a high median home value to match, and they're highly educated and really involved with the government in Southlake. And I first learned about the city and Dale's interest in growing GIS through my colleagues who were helping Dale and the city develop a strategic plan for GIS. And they were really excited to share with me how this person who was leading performance management at the city, who was new to GIS, saw all this great potential. So Dale, who's the chief of the Office of Performance Excellence, like I said, is new to GIS. And he manages these 5 business units that you see on the slide. And just last year, GIS was rolled under him. And this was the first time I had worked with a city where GIS directly reported up to performance management, so I thought that was really unique. That was one of the reasons I was interested in working with him. And even though he's new to GIS, he had a lot of success in these other 5 business areas. So his approach was to take what he had learned in developing these performance management approaches and apply it to building a GIS program. So again, for me, that seemed really unique, and that's why I was excited to learn what he was doing in developing GIS at the city. So for people who are new to GIS like Dale, a map is the common starting point. It's easy to think about GIS as just a map. But with performance management in particular, I'm really excited to think about how all aspects of our platform can really impact and improve the way that cities and counties and states are doing performance management. I think there's a huge amount of potential to move beyond the map. So an obvious next step is data, right? Performance management and measuring and collecting metrics about performance is all about data. And people who do performance management have access to data sets that a lot of times other agencies don't. GIS staff sometimes are challenged to get the types of data that a performance management office can. GIS helps take all that data from across these different city agencies and bring it together in a common platform and helps us present it in a common view when we need to take that comprehensive look across a whole set of city operations. But like a lot of organizations that are data rich, performance management offices suffer from a common challenge. They want that data to give them answers. And they need to understand things like trends over time. They need to understand how maybe a change in policy or plan might impact those metrics. And they need to ask really complex questions, maybe having to do with spatial relationships or understanding the complexities of the data. So of course, analytics that we can offer with GIS help get more value out of the data. A few speakers yesterday mentioned that citizens have really high expectations of governments. They're really expecting a modern experience when they interact with their governments. And GIS, as we know, can deliver modern web and mobile applications. I think this is especially relevant to performance management offices. They need to be really effective in communicating their data. And so the maps and apps that we can present through GIS really help with that. And an area that I think is most exciting is applying real-time to a performance management office. So think about being able to continually measure data inputs. It might be traffic or police dispatches or infrastructure assessments, whatever it might be. Imagine being able to bring that data in at real time, not just so that you can view it, but so that you can do continuous analytics. And imagine if you can do continuous analytics on that real-time data and drive more timely performance improvements. That would really be an exciting concept, I think. So this is a pretty complete vision for how GIS could enable performance management. And the reason I like describing it this way is because it's within reach to almost every organization. Most of you in this room have access to the tools and technology to do what I just described. It's just a matter of enabling it and equipping your staff with the maps and apps to help them do their job a bit better. So when you think about GIS and performance management, your mind might go here, the idea of a geospatial dashboard, collecting all of the key performance metrics and indicators on one page and providing it in a geography-based view. This is a great way to get started applying GIS to performance management. So I'm going to take you through a quick example of how Southlake is building performance management dashboards to support their work. So at a glance, we see the dashboard has color-coded indicators. This makes it really easy to see how well the city is doing in certain areas. This one is configured for public safety. So we have a variety of metrics related to public safety. And this data comes from a variety of different sources. You can see on the right-hand side, the satisfaction rating. That data is actually coming from citizens, and I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. And the other metrics are coming from a variety of places, maybe police dispatch systems or fire logs, whatever it might be. And again, GIS and dashboards like this let us create that unified view so we get that at-a-glance understanding. So for any one indicator, we can also view not just the current, but the historical conditions. So for example, this emergency preparedness satisfaction rating, the history of that is that Southlake wasn't always meeting their target of a 95% customer satisfaction rating. Now they are, but we can see that, and we can understand that improvements were made to meet that rating. The dashboards also let us view not just the entire city, but cycle through different geographies. So for internal users, this might be things like police districts, where we want to understand how a specific district might be performing versus the entire city, or if we quickly want to do comparisons from one district to another. We want citizens also to use these dashboards, and so residents might use a different geography to drill in and see data that matters to them. In this case, neighborhoods, which are called spin districts in Southlake. So when residents can see the data in the geography that matters to them, it engages them, it makes them interested in viewing the performance of the city. And so in this way, dashboards like this can really serve both internal and external customers, which I think is a great way to get more for the work that you do with GIS. So the data workflows in many cities are already in place. These dashboards just kind of geo-enable them. It gives us that geographic context, and it makes the data more accessible to a wider audience, really brings more value to the data. So we probably all know that performance management is about more than just the metrics. Having the metrics on the dashboard is one component, but it's really about improving city services. That's our ultimate outcome. So in a lot of communities that I work with, this starts with a strategic planning process. The plans are operationalized for each department in the form of annual work plans, and those departments might have regular quarterly performance reviews to make sure they're on track. If done right, we're looking at continuous performance improvement. We have that iterative approach to make sure that we're making changes where we need to. But in any performance management practice, the most important thing is figuring out what the right problem to focus on is. How do we decide what needs to be measured, monitored, and improved? We want to measure what matters. And what I found really interesting about working with Southlake is that they measure the voice of the citizen. Their constituents and residents in the city are the thing that drives their performance management process. And I found this to be really interesting, and it's not just lip service, talking with Dale and others at the city. They put 100% effort into making sure that the work that they do reflects the needs of the citizens. So I mentioned earlier that Southlake serves a really educated and highly involved community. And so that kind of drives why Southlake has to be so citizen-focused. The citizens demand it. They want to be involved in all aspects of government. And so by identifying what the residents find important, the city can prioritize. They can decide which city service improvements they want to focus on to meet the needs of the constituents. Now, a lot of times it's meetings, forums, unstructured feedback that citizens give. And so it can be difficult to figure out how to measure that. You have meeting minutes, or maybe you do some charrette exercises and things like that. But the city needed a more structured way to collect input from the citizens. And so like a lot of communities, they use a citizen survey to get the structured data that they need to operationalize the citizens' input. And this really started in 2007. The city of Southlake does a 2-year citizen survey. It's pretty comprehensive. It focuses on key strategic areas like public safety, mobility, infrastructure, some of the main types of city services that are provided. And they really use the results of the survey to guide their work, but also to measure their progress. So remember that dashboard I showed the citizen satisfaction ratings? That's data that comes directly from the dashboards. So it both informs and measures the work of the city. And this is how they focus on the right problem. This is how they know what to measure. So you can imagine the survey produces a lot of data, but again, the city is challenged in having the right tools to really understand this data. They can run statistical reports and view the spreadsheets and make maps, but they weren't really getting meaningful information out of it beyond just what was on the surface. So I want to take a quick look at a geospatial approach that'll help us dive a bit deeper in the survey data. And we're going to analyze the data a little bit differently. We want to get new ideas. We want to uncover things that we might not see at first glance. And I'm going to do this using insights for ArcGIS. So Jack mentioned yesterday the idea of geo-enabled systems. These are focused solution applications that provide a set of capabilities to a non-traditional GIS user. That's exactly what Insights is. It's going to give us the data visualization, the data exploration tools that we need to understand a data set like the citizen survey data without necessarily needing GIS information. So I'm going to switch over and demonstrate Insights for you. So we have the citizen survey data here. It's just stored in tabular form, and I've brought it into Insights. And we can see that citizens are answering questions on a variety of different topics. How would you rate trash collection service, for example? How have city services improved over time? So all this data exists tabularly, and Insights is going to make it really easy to get started with some quick visualizations. Before I get started, I just want to say Insights is one of my favorite tools to use. I kind of think of it as a puzzle. I have this data set, the citizen survey data, and I know it has secrets. I know it has things that it wants to tell me. And by using some of the tools and Insights, it's my job to kind of uncover what those secrets are. Think of it as a puzzle. And so it's always fun for me to get a new data set and learn how to explore it. All of the survey variables are listed here, and so we can get started really easy by taking any one of those data variables and dragging and dropping it to create different visualizations to understand the data. And so we'll start just by looking at a map of the citizen survey data. We can see it's pretty well distributed across the city, which is good. We're getting good responses from across the city. One of the first questions is asking citizens whether they think Southlake is moving in the right direction. And so let's take a look at how residents answer that question. So we can see that about 2/3 of the people, I'm working with about 1,000 survey results here, about 2/3 of the people say Southlake has improved. With Insights, I can quickly change the visualization type. So this might look better as a chart where I can see the different percentages. And we can see that the majority of residents feel pretty positive about the direction of Southlake. I can also style my map with that same data variable to make it easy to start seeing relationships. Maybe there's a concentration of a certain part of the city where folks think that Southlake is getting worse, for example. I could explore that quite easily. So the survey data also asks a lot of questions about respondents themselves. It captures some demographic data. So we want to take a look at that. And this is helpful to start exploring the relationships between different variables. So at a glance, I can see, for example, that most of my survey respondents are between 40 and 75 years old. So this tells me, hey, maybe next time we do the survey, I want to target a younger audience. They seem to be underrepresented in this. But what's nice is I can figure out if certain types of people, certain types of residents, feel differently about Southlake. So by linking these two charts together, I can really quickly explore those relationships. So if I click on the 30-year-olds, for example, I can see that the way that they rate Southlake is much different than, let's say, a segment of the older population. So by understanding which groups share a certain sentiment, that can help the city understand how they can address and engage with those citizens to get that additional feedback. So this survey asks a lot of questions about city services. It asks that residents to rate how important a city service is, how satisfied they are with it. So one of the things I want to do is understand what people are calling Southlake about. So they were asked, what's the reason that you most recently contacted the city? We'll go ahead and take a look at that. We can see the different types of calls that citizens would make represented here. And actually, the largest segment is NA. So it's kind of interesting in and of itself that there are a lot of residents that are not contacting the city or maybe didn't remember contacting the city. But we're going to go ahead and filter that out from this analysis. So Insights makes it easy to just kind of quickly remove that value. And now we can see a little bit more easily what the top reasons that residents are calling about. And just like before, I can use this data to start seeing relationships. To do that, I'm going to change the type of map I'm looking at to a map that more easily shows concentrations of data, so that I can click through and see, for example, residents who are calling about public works. They kind of live all over the city. Residents who are calling about parks, we maybe see a different pattern. There's actually a cluster of people who are calling about parks in the southern part of Southlake. So this is one of those little nuggets that I was talking about, uncovering something about the data. At this point, I've seen this pattern of people calling Southlake who live in the southern part of the city. This might pique my curiosity and give me more things that I want to explore. Again, I'm using the survey data to figure out what types of performance improvements I want to drive at the city. So one way we might go a little bit deeper is to look at the parks themselves. And so I'm zoomed in on this map. We're looking at the southern part of Southlake. We can see the parks and the survey respondents on the map. And one question I might want to ask and explore is, does park proximity matter? Do people who live near parks rate them better or worse than people who don't live near parks? And so Insights lets me visualize proximity in a few different ways. In this case, doing something like a walkable area might be a simple way to visualize that. And then let us see really quickly who lives near a park and who doesn't. That kind of divides up our population into these two different groups. And then we can start looking and understanding if there are differences there. So I've already charted that out. And we can take a look and see, for an example, there's a question called rate the importance of a variety of parks. And we can see that whether or not respondents are near a park or not near a park, it doesn't seem to influence their rating, right? Those pie charts look pretty much the same. So we kind of hit a dead end there. Park proximity doesn't seem to influence our survey results too much. So again, Insights is all about exploring. We're going to try to go down a different path here and see what we can find. I mentioned that residents are rating importance and satisfaction. And so one thing I thought would be interesting would be to understand that if someone rates something important, I really hope that they're satisfied, right? They're the ones that I want to really please. Versus someone who might think something is less important, if they're less than satisfied, that might not be as significant to me. So a heat chart like this makes it really easy to understand the correlation between these variables. So we can see that most people who rate park variety important are really satisfied with it. That's great news. I actually want to go and dive in on these other segments, people who rate it important but are less than satisfied. They're the ones that are maybe anticipating or seeing a problem with it. Again, I can highlight them and see them on the map. I don't really notice any patterns, so the next thing I want to do is actually aggregate this by neighborhood. So I can take our neighborhood districts and drag it onto the map and really quickly do a spatial analysis to understand which neighborhoods in Southlake have the most dissatisfied citizens when it comes to parks. I see that same pattern, right, the southern part of the city. These are the same people who are calling about parks, so I'm starting to see a relationship there, which is encouraging me to go a little bit further. And actually, if we look at one of these districts, or excuse me, one of these neighborhoods, we can see that there's only one park in that district. So it kind of makes sense that people here are saying, hey, I'm not quite happy with park variety. They only have one park in their district. That kind of highlights the problem. So this is the type of thing that I might uncover from this data that will help influence planning or policy decisions. And Insights makes it easy to take the work that I've done and communicate that message forward. And it does it in two different ways. The first is that it documents everything I've done in this analysis workflow. So remember, Southlake does a citizen survey every 2 years. I'm going to need to repeat this analysis. It's all documented and repeatable here. I can tweak it and share it if needed. The other way that Insights makes it easy to share my results is by letting me create more simplified, read-only views of my data in my workbooks. So I've taken some of what I learned in Neighborhood 10 and the fact that they only have one park and a lot of unhappy residents, and I've packaged it up into this view. It's still interactive, so people who are maybe wanting to look at this data themselves can come in and work with it, but it's a much more friendly view and it summarizes my findings as well. So it makes it easy to communicate my information to others in my organization. So I think you saw Insights is a great tool for data exploration. That citizen survey data has a lot of rich things that we can uncover by looking at the variables, by doing analysis, and looking at it spatially. So it's a really nice tool for that. So Southlake has recently started using Insights. One of the first areas they're going to apply it to is the citizen survey data, like I just showed you. So I really like Insights, like I said. It's rewarding to kind of get someone else interested and hooked on it. But I like to also step back and take a little bit of a more comprehensive approach and make sure that when I'm working with a city, we're not just focused on point solutions, but we're really looking at a broader strategy. So So I mentioned that when Dale started managing GIS, he wanted to do just that. He wanted to develop a broad strategy, and that's where Esri started working with him. And our approach at Esri was to work with Dale and do an envisioning workshop. And I just wanted to take a minute to describe that. So an envisioning workshop gave Esri a chance to meet with Dale and his colleagues and various stakeholders from across the city, stakeholders from different business units. So it might be the chief of police, the director of public works, others at that level. And the idea is that we wanted to start to understand their business. We wanted to understand what their challenges were. We wanted to start to form ideas about how geospatial technology could help them, and really have that start to outline a strategy for Dale. So over the course of 3 days, we met with 12 different business units. It's a lot of conversation. We keep it higher level than the technology. So we weren't necessarily suggesting solutions or highlighting different capabilities that we have. It was really all about learning their business so that we could come back later with recommendations. So the recommendations that we came back later, we presented it in the form of an executive briefing. We had the room full of decision makers that you see in the pictures there. And what that did is it generated buy-in. It let everyone in the room who they had minimal experience and exposure to GIS, it gave everyone in the room the understanding that GIS could move beyond a map. It kind of lit that fire or that curiosity in everyone. And getting that level of buy-in is going to be key for Dale as he develops a geospatial strategy. And that's a technique that I've seen work across the board with many different governments. And it's a nice repeatable approach that we can do. And it's oftentimes a game changer for people who want to develop and move forward with a different strategy for GIS. So workshops like that make it easy to identify new solutions and tie them into core business needs. So with regards to performance management, I just wanted to highlight a few other examples that are on the top of Southlake's list. So one thing they already have underway is a dashboard for their fire department. A key priority for them was to provide transparency into dispatch and response times. The city's demographics are changing. They want to make sure that they know as soon as possible if they need to consider different operations for their fire department. Another real-time example is going to be improving traffic management with Waze. If you look at the citizen survey data, there's a huge spike of people who are concerned about traffic issues. That's the #1 issue at the city. So the city is trying really hard to respond to that. They're looking at asset management solutions like workforce and field data collection applications to streamline operations across the city. They have a lot of redundancy with field crews who might go visit the same location for multiple types of work. So they really want to streamline that and improve the perception of residents in terms of how the city is providing those services. When it comes to the zoning process, they really have a need to reduce the time to notify citizens of a zoning change. That has a real kind of financial impact to the city if they fail to do so. So they're looking at applications that can automate that process. And in order to wrap a lot of these things together, the city is also looking at using a hub site to tie the data that they already have on their government website, the maps and apps that they're developing, and kind of meet them in the middle, kind of marry them together in a new site that reflects the city's initiatives and focus on city services. So all of these applications are really citizen-focused. They really represent the desire that the city has to focus on service delivery improvements. And that makes sense. When we think back to that process that's driving performance management, it's all about the voice of the citizen or voice of the customer at Southlake. So all of these applications will help drive performance management improvements across the city. I'm really excited to see where this journey takes them. So with that, I'll wrap up. Thanks everyone for your time today. Christian, I'll hand it back to you. Yeah.